Here's the lie you swallowed. If you repeat something enough times, your brain will keep it. Just grind, read and reread, highlight every word. That's how you win. But you know the truth. You sit for hours, eyes glazing over, only to blank out when you need it most. The page is full, but your mind is empty. What's going on? Let's make this brutally clear. Memorizing isn't learning. It's like photocopying a textbook, then shredding the copy 5 minutes later. You feel busy, but you aren't moving. You're stuck on a treadmill while everyone else is running outside. The knowledge looks familiar, but it slips through your fingers when you reach for it. Here's the pain. You put in the hours, but get none of the payoff. You ace the quiz, then freeze in a real conversation. You pass the test, but can't explain the basics without peeking at your notes. You think you have the answer, but all you have is the password. Where's the disconnect? Your brain isn't a hard drive that saves every file. It's a living network, pruning useless data to make room for what matters. When you treat learning like downloading, your mind deletes it just as quickly. The system is rigged against rote. But here's the error everyone makes: mistaking recognition for recall. You see a definition and nod along. But when the paper is blank, your mind is too. You never built the circuit, you just saw the wire. Imagine trying to fix a car by memorizing the manual, but never touching a wrench. That's how most people study, and that's why they forget. Because the knowledge never left the page and entered their hands. But let's go deeper. Think about your last study session. Did you actually wrestle with the idea, or did you just trace its outline? Did you try to explain it to yourself, or did you just hope it would stick? Most people treat learning like painting by numbers. Fill in the blanks, stay inside the lines, and hope the picture makes sense. But real understanding is messy. It's trial and error. It's breaking things apart and putting them back together until you see how the pieces fit. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The education system rewards short-term memory, not long-term mastery. You're trained to cram, regurgitate, and forget. The cycle repeats. You never get to the core. You never own the knowledge. You rent it for the exam, then move out the next day. But what if you flipped the script? What if you stopped chasing the illusion of learning and started building something real? That's the shift Feynman made. That's the shift you can make, starting now. If you want to join the minority who study to understand, not just pass, subscribe now. Here's the difference. Most people treat learning like painting over rust. You slap on a shiny coat, memorize, recite, repeat, but underneath, the structure is corroded. Richard Feynman saw straight through this. He didn't care about the gloss. He wanted to see if the steel beneath would hold. Picture Feynman as a kid, captivated by the mechanics of a spinning plate in the cafeteria. He didn't just watch, he started asking why it wobbles, why it doesn't fall. Everyone else saw a plate. Feynman saw a riddle. That's the lens he carried into physics and into learning itself. He never accepted the surface answer. He wanted to see the gears turning underneath. He once told the story of failing an oral exam at Princeton. He could recite formulas and definitions, but when asked to explain why a gyroscope stays upright, he blanked. That moment split his world in two, knowing the name of something versus knowing how it works. Feynman realized that most students and even many teachers live in the first world, confusing recognition for understanding. It's like looking at a map and thinking you've walked the terrain. He called this the illusion of knowledge. You recognize a term, you think you own it. But real knowledge is like dismantling a clock and being able to rebuild it from scratch. If you can't explain it to a child or to yourself in plain language, you don't really get it. Feynman was ruthless with himself. He refused to let the paint cover the rust. He would ask, do I really understand this, or am I just repeating words? Imagine you're learning about electricity. Most people memorize Ohm's law, V equals IR. But Feynman would ask, what does that actually mean? Why does increasing resistance lower the current? What's happening inside the wire? He'd break it down until he could see the electrons bumping along, feel the resistance, visualize the flow. Only then did he trust his understanding. Here's the epiphany. Feynman's superpower wasn't genius. It was brutal honesty with his own ignorance. He hunted down gaps in his understanding and shined a spotlight on them. He didn't hide behind jargon. He didn't bluff. And this mindset is what allowed him to remember and truly use what he learned. He didn't fear saying, "I don't know." He saw it as the starting line, not a defeat. But here's where almost everyone stumbles. You think you're learning when you're just collecting labels. Feynman saw that the real process is stripping away the false confidence and rebuilding, piece by piece, until the structure is solid. It's uncomfortable. It exposes what you don't know. But it's the only path to real mastery. So the next time you're tempted to memorize a fact, ask yourself, can you take it apart? Can you build it back up? Or are you just painting over rust? Feynman's lens wasn't just for physics. It's the tool for seeing through the illusion in every subject, every skill, every day. Here's the core flaw. Your brain isn't a hard drive. It's not built to store isolated files on command. It's more like a neural jungle, thick, alive, messy. Every fact you cram in without context is a seed thrown on concrete. No roots, no life. That's why you forget. It's not your fault. The system itself is broken. Think of rote memorization as pouring water through a sieve. You feel productive, flashcards, highlighters, repetition, hours spent. But what sticks? Only what snags on meaning. The rest leaks out. You're not lazy, you're using the wrong tool for the job. Here's the analogy. Imagine trying to build a bridge by balancing planks across a river, hoping they'll hold simply because you stacked them. But there's no structure, no interlocking parts. The first gust, stress, time, distraction, and everything collapses. That's what happens in your mind when you try to memorize without understanding. There's no scaffold for ideas to cling to. Neurologically, this isn't just poetic. Your synapses strengthen when you connect new data to old frameworks, stories, models, cause and effect. If you don't build those bridges, the information floats, unanchored. You can't recall what never took root. This is why cramming feels efficient but yields emptiness. The hippocampus, the brain's gateway to long-term memory, filters out disconnected noise. Only meaning gets a pass. But here's the mistake everyone makes: confusing familiarity with understanding. Just because you've seen the page, heard the lecture, recited the definition, your brain tricks you. It feels known, but it isn't yours. Feynman called this false knowing, the illusion of competence. You don't own the knowledge, you're renting it, and the landlord wants it back the moment you walk out of the exam. So stop blaming your memory. The real culprit is shallow processing. Every time you skip the step of making sense, linking, visualizing, explaining, you're sabotaging yourself. The mind is wired for meaning, not mindless repetition. But let's go deeper. When you memorize for the sake of memorizing, you're treating knowledge like a list of passwords. You hope you'll remember the right code at the right time. But real understanding is more like knowing the layout of a city. If one street is blocked, you find another route. You navigate, improvise, adapt. That's what Feynman did. He built mental maps, not just lists. He could explain a concept from any angle because he understood the terrain, not just the signposts. Here's the error nearly everyone makes, thinking that effort equals retention. You grind through pages, underline, recite, but without integration, it's all surface. The brain is a pattern-seeking machine. It craves connections, not isolated dots. If you don't weave new information into your existing web of knowledge, it fades. That's why you remember stories, analogies, and personal experiences, because they're anchored. Facts without anchors drift away. So the next time you feel frustrated by forgetting, realize it's not a personal flaw. It's a signal. Your brain is telling you, give me meaning, not just noise. Feynman mastered this. He didn't settle for names or formulas. He demanded explanations that made sense to a child. That's the difference between memorizing a phone number and knowing how to build a phone. One is fragile, the other is robust, adaptable, unforgettable. Here's the fundamental truth. Your brain is not a tape recorder. It's more like a sculptor. If you just name things, memorize definitions, formulas, dates, you're stacking blocks without glue. One shake and it all collapses. But if you understand, you carve connections. You fuse concepts together, so even if you forget the exact label, the shape remains. Feynman called this the difference between knowing the name of something and knowing the thing itself. Imagine a tree. Memorizing is like sticking leaves on with tape. They look fine until a breeze comes. Comprehension is like growing roots. The knowledge stands, storms are not. Your brain's architecture demands this. Neurons don't store data like files on a computer. They build networks, webs of association and causality. When you understand, you create multiple pathways to retrieve an idea. If one fades, others compensate. That's why a story, an image, or an analogy can trigger recall even when rote memory fails. Here's the technical reason repetition alone is weak. Repetition without understanding is like drawing a map with invisible ink. You can trace the route 100 times, but in the dark, you're lost. True learning prints the route into the landscape. That's why you remember the plot of a movie you saw once, but forget a list you repeated 10 times. But here's the deeper layer. Understanding is an active process. It's not just reading, highlighting, or listening. It's wrestling with the idea until it yields. Feynman would interrogate concepts. What is this? Why does it work? How would I explain it to someone who's never heard of it? He'd strip away jargon, rebuild the idea from scratch, and only then trust he'd learned it. Think of your mind as a workshop, not a warehouse. Warehouses store boxes, workshops build things. When you treat knowledge as something to be built, not stored, you naturally reinforce it. Every time you explain, connect, or apply, you hammer another nail into the structure. This is why cramming fails. Cramming is like inflating a balloon with hot air. It looks full, but it leaks fast. Deep understanding is like forging a metal sculpture. It takes more effort up front, but the result is solid, lasting, and uniquely yours. So, the core principle: don't aim to remember, aim to understand so deeply that remembering becomes a side effect. Test yourself. Can you explain the idea to a 12-year-old using only words they know? If you can, you own the knowledge. If you can't, the knowledge owns you. Here's where everyone slips. They think knowing the name or the fact is enough. Feynman never made that mistake. He always drilled down. What does this really mean? Why does it work this way, not another? The power is not in the label, but in the logic beneath it. And here's the epiphany. When you build knowledge from the ground up, you don't just remember. You can use, adapt, and even invent. That's the Feynman way. That's how you make forgetting impossible. Let's get concrete. You want to stop forgetting? Here's the Feynman technique in action, step by step. No mystical hacks, just the physics of thinking. First, pick a topic. Not a chapter title, not a vague notion. Pick an actual concept. Imagine you have to teach it to someone who knows nothing. That's your test. If you can't explain it to a total beginner, you don't own the knowledge. You're just renting it for the exam. Now write it out. No slides, no bullet points. Paper, pen, and brutal honesty. Every time you hit a word you can't explain simply, stop. That's the fracture point in your knowledge. Feynman called this the illusion of competence, when you know the name of something but not the thing itself. Most people stop at this illusion. They think, I've heard this before, so I must understand it. That's the trap. Here's your visual. Picture building a Lego bridge with missing pieces. It looks solid from afar, but when you put weight on it, real-life problems, it collapses. That's what happens with rote memorization. The gaps don't show up until you need to use the structure. Your brain is a builder, not a photocopier. It needs to assemble, not just store. So when you stumble, don't gloss over it. Dive back into the source material. Not to copy, but to reconstruct. Reteach yourself from scratch. If you can't explain it to a 12-year-old, you don't understand it yet. That's not an insult. It's the biological checkpoint of learning. Your brain only stores what it can compress into a simple, connected model. If the model is fragmented, retrieval fails. That's not forgetting. That's never having learned. Next, connect the idea to something you already know. Use analogies. Turn the abstract into the tangible. Electricity as water in a pipe. Entropy as messy bedrooms. Gravity as a stretched rubber sheet. The brain craves links, not isolated facts. Every new idea needs a hook, a place to hang in your mental closet. Without that, it falls to the floor and disappears. Now, test yourself. Don't reread, don't highlight, do recall. Close the book and explain aloud. Stumble? Good, that's the signal. Repair the bridge. Repeat. Every cycle, your model gets stronger. Less to memorize, more to understand. This is not passive review. This is active construction. You're not a spectator. You're the engineer of your own mind. But here's where everyone fails. They stop at feeling familiar. Familiarity is not mastery. Feynman never confused the two. You shouldn't either. The feeling of, I get it, is a mirage until you can prove it with your own words, your own logic, your own analogies. That's the crucible of real learning. Here's a final analogy. Think of your mind as a workshop, not a warehouse. Warehouses store boxes, unopened, untouched, forgotten. Workshops build, test, and refine. Every time you explain, analogize, and reconstruct, you're forging tools, not just stacking boxes. Tools you can use, adapt, and even invent with. That's the Feynman way. That's the process. That's how you make knowledge stick, not by cramming, but by reconstructing, testing, and connecting. The technique isn't sexy. It's just the way reality works. If you want to remember for life, you have to build for life. Every step is a test of understanding, not a rehearsal of memory. That's the only method that survives the test of time and the real world. But here's the catch, the invisible wall you keep crashing into. Your own mind wants shortcuts. It craves the illusion of progress. You finish a chapter, highlight a sentence, watch a video, and feel productive. But your neurons are just echoing, not rewiring. Feynman called this self-deception, fooling yourself. Picture it like taping a flashlight to your head and convincing yourself you've become the sun. The light feels real because it's close, but the world stays dark. That's what memorizing definitions does to your brain. You feel illuminated in the moment, but you're still blind to meaning. Here's the real obstacle: ego. The pain of not knowing, of having to admit, I don't get this, is unbearable for most people. So you pretend you understand. You avoid the discomfort of confusion by repeating words, not ideas. You trade depth for certainty. Feynman never did this. He leaned into his ignorance, exposed it, and cut through it. But your brain sets traps. It rewards you for what's easy, not what's right. It likes to check boxes, not build bridges. You reread, you recite, you underline. The page gets brighter, but your neurons don't fire in new patterns. You're stuck in what neuroscientists call passive encoding, the knowledge equivalent of painting over rust. The other hidden enemy? Impatience. Real understanding takes time, time your dopamine-starved brain doesn't want to invest. You want closure, so you rush. You skip the step where you'd have to break down and rebuild. You never see how fragile your knowledge really is until it collapses under pressure. But here's the error everyone makes. You confuse activity with achievement. You think that because you spent hours with the material, you've mastered it. But mastery isn't measured by time spent. It's measured by transformation. Did your mind change shape? Did you wrestle with the idea until it became part of you? Or did you just let it pass through, like water through a sieve? Feynman's genius wasn't just in his intellect, it was in his relentless honesty. He refused to let his ego hide behind jargon or rote answers. He'd say, "I don't know," more than anyone else in the room. That's why he learned faster and deeper than his peers. He didn't fear ignorance, he hunted it down. The final trap, social pressure. You want to look competent, so you mimic what everyone else does. You copy their study habits, their shortcuts, their surface-level confidence. But most people are lost. They're building sandcastles at low tide, and you're following them straight into the ocean. Feynman's way is lonely, sometimes uncomfortable, but it's the only path that leads to real understanding. The irony? These traps feel good. They give you a false sense of mastery. But Feynman's approach demands you sacrifice that comfort. You have to let go of looking smart and choose instead to become smart. That's the mental shift. Most will never do it. Will you? Here's the mind bender. This isn't just about memorizing physics equations or passing exams. The Feynman mind shift rewires how you approach every challenge in life. Imagine your brain as a cluttered workshop. Most people keep piling in new tools, random facts, borrowed opinions, until they can't find what matters. Feynman taught you to clear the bench. Keep only what you truly understand. Build from the ground up, not from the top down. Think about it. When you actually grasp a concept, it's like forging a custom tool. It fits your hand perfectly. You can solve problems others can't even see. When you fake understanding, you have a drawer full of keys that open nothing. That's the difference between walking into a dark room and fumbling for a switch versus knowing exactly where the light is and flipping it on confidently. This mindset isn't limited to science. Relationships, careers, even your sense of self. Every domain suffers when you pretend to know rather than strive to understand. Feynman once said, "You must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool." Most people spend their lives polishing their own illusions. But when you commit to real understanding, you stop being a prisoner of your own ignorance. You become a builder, not a collector. Here's the error everyone makes. They think this level of clarity is unattainable or only for geniuses. Feynman demolished that excuse. He proved that relentless curiosity and brutal honesty are more powerful than raw IQ. The world rewards those who see clearly, not those who memorize the most. But here's where the analogy gets sharper. Imagine you're building a bridge, not just stacking bricks. If you don't understand the foundation, the whole structure collapses under pressure. That's why surface-level knowledge fails you in real life. When stress hits, an exam, a crisis, a new problem, only true understanding holds up. Everything else crumbles. Feynman's approach is a universal solvent. It dissolves confusion in any field. In business, the person who understands the core mechanics, not just the jargon, outperforms the one who parrots buzzwords. In relationships, real empathy comes from understanding, not from memorizing scripts. Even your own beliefs. If you can't explain why you think what you think, you're just reciting someone else's lines. Here's the second epiphany. This mindset is rare because it's uncomfortable. It forces you to admit what you don't know. But that's the only way to learn anything real. Most people would rather look smart than be smart. Feynman chose the opposite. That's why he changed the world. This is why the Feynman technique isn't a study trick, it's a life philosophy. You can't fake clarity. When you choose to genuinely understand, you end up with fewer but infinitely sharper tools. That changes everything, not just how you learn, but how you live. Isn't that the real test? Picture your mind as a workshop. Most people, desperate to remember, just scatter parts everywhere. Facts, formulas, definitions, hoping that if they pile up enough, something will click. But nothing ever runs. Feynman's way is surgical. You pick up each part, ask what it does, fit it into the structure, test it, break it, rebuild it, until the whole machine works under your hands. This is the mind shift. You stop measuring progress by how much you can recite and start measuring by how deeply you can explain. You stop fearing the blank page and start seeing it as a blueprint. Can you take apart the idea and put it back together in your own words? Can you teach it to a child or to yourself when you're tired and distracted? That's the real exam, the one life keeps throwing at you, not the one you cram for the night before. Here's the trap everyone falls into, believing that knowledge is about collecting. It isn't. It's about constructing. The more you practice this, the more the world stops being a fog of jargon and becomes a landscape you can actually navigate. Problems shrink from monsters to puzzles. You stop being intimidated by complexity because you know how to break it down. You become a builder, not a hoarder. But here's the epiphany. This transformation isn't limited to physics or math or biology. The Feynman approach is a universal solvent. Relationships, careers, even your own self-doubt. Everything gets clearer when you insist on deep understanding over shallow repetition. When you demand clarity, you force yourself to confront what you don't know. That's uncomfortable, but it's the only way to grow. Feynman called this intellectual honesty. Most people run from it. He ran toward it. You might feel exposed right now, as if a light just revealed the cracks in your own learning. That's not failure. That's the beginning of becoming unforgettably sharp. Every time you catch yourself parroting, stop. Ask, what does this really mean? How would I explain it to someone who's never seen it before? If you can't, don't panic. That's your cue to dig deeper, not to give up. This is the new model. Less memorizing, more building. Less fear, more curiosity. Less pretending, more clarity. The world is full of people who know the words, but not the music. You're here to play the music. If this video shifted even one gear in your mind, the next will spin the whole engine. Subscribe to the next mind shift and step into the minority that dares to understand, not just repeat.